and that we make possible in each of these days. Our best wishes to the United Nations. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Cape Verde for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear now an address by His Majesty King Mswati III, Head of the State of the Kingdom of Eswatini. I request protocol to escort His Majesty. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Majesty King Mswati III, Head of State of the Kingdom of Eswatini, to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Your Excellency, Heads of State and Government, UN Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to address this distinguished 77th United Nations General Assembly, where we have once again come together as a community of nations to renew our commitment to implementing the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals agenda. We are meeting at a time when we have just passed through a stage of tragedies brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has claimed lives all over the world. We thank God that this period is subsiding. We must praise the countries of the world for uniting to fight this pandemic up to this stage where it is on the verge of being eradicated. The development and supply of COVID-19 vaccines has proven to be very useful, especially with regard to the prevention interventions. We also applaud the UN for being instrumental in working under extremely difficult conditions. It remained resolute in assisting countries, and it is safe to say we are where we are today because of their efforts. Despite these challenges, it is encouraging to think that there were some positives to take away from this experience. In the case of Eswatini, we were compelled to develop testing laboratories and oxygen storage facilities, which are now very helpful in the fight against other health issues. We have witnessed the availability of oxygen, which has been used in saving the lives of snake bite victims, among other medical emergencies. The COVID pandemic arrived in the midst of an HIV/AIDS pandemic, which we were still battling with, and it affected various programs that had been put in place. Eswatini has made great strides in the fight against HIV and AIDS. The country became a shining example for the continent and the world at large after it attained the 95 UNAIDS treatment cascade targets in 2020. We are now focused on ending the AIDS pandemic as a global health threat by 2030. This milestone would never have been possible without the support of the development partners who have been with the country since 1986, when the first AIDS case was announced. Mr. President, it is unfortunate that even after COVID, when we were beginning to say that there is hope, we are now confronted with the conflicts that are taking place all over the world. Their consequences include, among other things, the loss of life. These conflicts and tensions have also contributed significantly to the rise in food prices globally. They are not unique to a certain area, as they persist in Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. We hope to see an end to these clashes through peaceful resolutions. We must applaud the UN for its effort to prevent these conflicts from escalating. Hopefully, there will be long-lasting, fruitful results emerging from these UN interventions. As we gather here at the UN, we're all reminded of the main purpose of establishing the organization, which was to reduce tensions that led to conflict around the world. We hope the aspirations of our forefathers will guide us in using the organization to bring us together so that we can resolve our differences where they exist and find lasting solutions. This will no doubt be of great help to all mankind. These problems are a setback to the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which are ongoing given that COVID has had a negative impact, while the conflicts are also taking their own toll on these programs. During the pandemic, we witnessed the collapse of many economies, the shutdowns of industries, and the disruption of poverty alleviation projects that could not be implemented properly due to all the prevention measures, which meant there was no movement of people and goods. Nevertheless, now that COVID is subsiding, it is high time for all of us to once again renew our focus on the SDGs and implement them, as they will play a crucial role in helping our countries develop. We also note the importance of the role that needs to be played by financial institutions in assisting countries in the recovery process, as most countries really suffered a lot, economical and financial, which means they face challenges in raising resources to fund this process. We hope and urge our financial institutions to remain open and receiving countries that need support to revive their developmental programs, to welcome their request with sympathy to the plight of the challenges that they faced during the troubling COVID and HIV/AIDS challenges. We do appreciate that in recent days, we have seen the financial multilateral organizations become more welcoming towards countries in need of budget support. We trust the world will continue to come together to resolve these challenges, as countries have a great strain on their resources, a situation that will be felt for some time to come. We hope the world will come together to contribute to resolving some of these problems. Our theme for this 77th session of the General Assembly is a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges. The theme fits very well with the several issues we are facing in the world today. The Kingdom of Eswatini, like all other member states, has not been immune to these encounters that have a heightened pressure on our already stressed economies. They have served to derail us from our pursuit of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Agenda 2030 and the African Union Aspirations 2063, the Africa we want. The theme should therefore serve to kickstart our economies towards recovery and enable us to create a sustainable future for our people. As the Kingdom of Eswatini, we are continuing with our efforts to attract investment and to support small, medium enterprises, as well as create big industries, In doing so, we realize the need for reliable energy to help us achieve our investment goals. So it is one of the areas we are working on developing as a region. We are also focused on remaining highly competitive, which is why the World Bank Ease of Doing Business ranks us at the top in Africa when it comes to trading across borders. The government has also put in place fiscal support measures to ensure the cost of establishment of businesses and initial operational costs are reduced drastically through a range of options from fiscal to non-fiscal incentives. The creation of special economic zones has placed us at an advantage to leverage our export potential through attracting export-oriented manufacturing projects. Eswatini is also well positioned as a launch pad to the African Continental Free Trade Area, which seeks to boost intra-Africa trade with a market of 1.2 billion people and a combined GDP of 2.2 trillion US dollars. The country is also engaged in creating opportunities for our youth to address the issue of unemployment and poverty. There are opportunities to be explored in areas of ICT, agriculture, and the informal sector, to name but a few. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Eswatini welcomes the new program by the UNDP to support our youth in Africa who want to engage in entrepreneurship to mitigate the issues of poverty. This is a noble idea, and we are ready to embrace it. Food security and ending hunger remain a priority for the government of the Kingdom of Eswatini. We are deploying a double-pronged strategy to address this challenge by providing social safety nets for the most vulnerable groups. We have increased budget allocations, engaged in emergency food aid distribution, providing cash transfers to the elderly and vulnerable school feeding programs, and other support services for disadvantaged populations. With regard to agriculture growth and development, the key projects driven by this public investment include the acceleration of water harvesting and irrigation development, where an average of 1,000 hectares is developed with irrigation every year. We are also creating market-linked agriculture growth opportunities for small and emerging farmers to produce and generate income to enhance their livelihoods. The negative effects of climate change are compelling the kingdom, the government, to build more dams throughout the kingdom for irrigation. Other initiatives include the rollout of input subsidies for staple food crops. The combination of these programs has also increased the production of maize, our staple food, by 30% for 2021-2022 farming season, only 9% short of our national target. With the global stability at stake, Africans have recognized the need to guard against opportunists who seek to take advantage of the fragile economies to advance their agendas. Ours is a history littered with problems of the past and ongoing attempts to infiltrate our countries through covert and overt means. Eswatini is of the ardent belief that Africa must have a permanent representation in the United Nations Security Council, a call made in Ezulwini consensus in 2005. Our position emanates from the fact that every democracy has its exceptionality, and that societies are founded according to different cultural norms and values. We will not tire of the consideration and belated adoption of this call by the UN to bring in the proper perspective on the African polity. When the world faced the COVID pandemic, it must be noted that no country was spared, which means we all needed to come together to find solutions. Unfortunately, Taiwan was unable to access some of the World Health Organization's WHO programs and thus implement the remedies that required their approval. We continue to appeal for Taiwan to be considered for full participation in the UN agencies. We are confident that the global village would benefit substantially from Taiwan's meaningful participation in the UN system. The Kingdom of Eswatini calls upon the United Nations to make the necessary arrangements for Taiwan to significantly participate in relevant UN specialized agencies and mechanisms. Mr. President, as I conclude, Eswatini remains confident in the global body's capability to confront and overcome the challenges we face, because most of them are man-made. We can achieve this through our full commitment to the ideals of the United Nations Charter. This time, history is calling on each member state to intensify efforts to address our plight if we envisage triumphantly walking the path to 2030. However, and most importantly, we must remain certain about one important thing. Our success hinges on unity and respect for one another, which is key to all the outcomes of this 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Despite our diversity, we are one big happy family. We need to give the world and our people hope and confidence that the United Nations has the entire mandate to play its role in all global issues that affect mankind. I thank you. May Almighty God bless us all.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Head of State of the Kingdom of Eswatini, for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Majesty. In accordance with Decision 77/506 of 16th of September 2022, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine to introduce an address by the Head of State.
Mr. President, I have the honor to introduce the pre-recorded statement by His Excellency, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine.
Greetings to all people of the world who value peace and unity between different and equal nations. I wish you all peace. I thank you that we are united in our striving to restore peace and to guarantee peace for any nation that has become a victim of the armed aggression. A crime has been committed against Ukraine, and we demand just punishment. The crime was committed against our state borders. The crime was committed against the lives of our people. The crime was committed against the dignity of our women and men. The crime was committed against the values that make you and me a community of the United Nations. And Ukraine demands punishment for trying to steal our territory, punishment for the murders of thousands of people, punishment for tortures and humiliations of women and men, punishment for the catastrophic turbulence that Russia provoked with its illegal war, and not only for us, Ukrainians, but for the whole world, for every nation that is represented in this hall of the UN General Assembly. I'm speaking on behalf of the state which is forced to defend itself, but has the formula for peace. I'm speaking to everyone who wants to hear how to achieve peace. I will present a formula that can work, not only for us, but for everyone who may find themselves in similar circumstances as we did. It's a formula that punishes crime, protects life, restores security and territorial integrity, guarantees security, and provides determination. There are 5 preconditions for peace. Dear Mr. President of the General Assembly, dear Secretary General of the United Nations, dear heads of states and governments, dear journalists, nations of the world, Ukraine wants peace. Europe wants peace. The world wants peace. And we have seen who is the only one who wants war. There is only one entity among all UN member states who would say now, if he could interrupt my speech, that he's happy with this war, with his war. But we will not let this entity prevail over us, even though it's the largest state in the world. Ukraine showed strength on the battlefield, using its right to self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, and no one will reproach us now or in the future with weakness or inability to fight for ourselves, for our independence. We are achieving a result in this fight, and we see what the end of this war will be and what will be the guarantees of a stable peace. The UN Charter proclaims the equality of nations, and we proved that Ukraine is equal among the equals. The UN Charter protects the inviolability of borders, and we confirm our state borderline by expelling the occupiers outside. The UN Charter stipulates the value of human rights, dignity, and life, and we also stipulate them with every Ukrainian city freed from Russian occupation. We didn't provoke this war. We held 88 rounds of talks in various formats to prevent this war, just from the beginning of my presidency until February 24 this year. But Russia, instead of stopping the crime of aggression, which it started back in 2014, turned it into a full-scale invasion. And we have no choice but to defend ourselves. We do it. We push the aggressor beyond the internationally recognized border of the Ukrainian state. And this is the first item of our peace formula. Comprehensive item. Punishment. Punishment for the crime of aggression. Punishment for violation of borders and territorial integrity. Punishment that must be in place until the internationally recognized border is restored, until the aggression stops, and until the damages and losses for the war are fully compensated. Therefore, sanctions against the aggressor are part of the peace formula, blocking the trade and relations with the aggressor is a part of the peace formula. All this is a punishment. So long as the aggressor is a party to decision-making in the international organization, he must be isolated from them, at least until aggression lasts. Reject the right to vote, deprive delegation rights, remove the right of veto if it is a member of the UN Security Council, in order to punish the aggressor within the institutions. We shouldn't turn a blind eye to propagandists who justify aggression, but apply a full package of personal restrictions against them. That is a punishment for lying. Citizens of the aggressor state shouldn't be allowed to enjoy tourism or shopping in the territory of those who value peace, but should be encouraged through visa restrictions to fight against the aggression of their own state. Punish for abetting the evil. A special tribunal should be created to punish Russia for the crime of aggressor against our state. This will become signal to all would-be aggressors that they must value peace or be brought to responsibility by the world. We have prepared precise steps to establish such tribunal. They will be presented to all states. Ukraine will appeal to the UN General Assembly to support an international compensation mechanism. We count on your support. Russia should pay for this war with its assets. It's also a punishment. This is one of the most terrible punishments for Russian officials who value money above everything else. The second item of the peace formula is the protection of life, the most concrete item. Now, while the sessions of the General Assembly continue in the Ukrainian town of Izum, Kharkiv, representatives of Russia, why the Russian military are so obsessed with castration. What was done to them so that they want to do this to others? The only thing that differs the mass burial in Izum from what the world saw in Bucha is in fact the burial. The Russian army was in Izum for a longer time, and therefore the bodies of the killed people were buried and not scattered on the streets. So how can we allow the Russian army somewhere on Ukrainian soil, knowing that they're committing such mass murders everywhere? We cannot. We must protect life. The world must protect life. Every state suffering the armed aggression needs the opportunity to protect its citizens and liberate its territory. If it requires help, with weapons or shells, they should be provided. If you needed financial help for this, it should be given. If for this it's necessary to help with intelligence data, just do it. But what is not needed is lies. We can return the Ukrainian flag to our entire territory. We can do it with the force of arms, but we need time. We tried to speed it up. We tried to implement the basic provisions of the UN Charter for Ukraine through negotiations, but Russia is afraid of real negotiations and doesn't want to fulfill any fair international obligations. It lies to everyone, as it's typical for aggressors, for terrorists. Even now, when Russia talks about negotiations, it only wants to slow down its retreat. Russia wants to spend the winter on the occupied territory of Ukraine and prepare forces to attempt a new offensive, new Buchas, new Izums, or at least it wants to prepare fortifications on occupied land and carry out military mobilization at home. We cannot agree to a delayed war because it will be even hotter than the war now. For us, this is a war for life. That is why we need defense support, weapons, military equipment, and shells. Offensive weapons and long-range one is enough to liberate our land, and defensive systems, above all air defense. And we need financial support to keep internal stability and fulfill social obligation to our people. Physical and social protection are two elements of any nation's life. So the second item of our peace formula is the protection of life by all available means allowed by the UN Charter. The third item of our peace formula is restoring security and territorial integrity. Look at how many elements of global security Russia has undermined with its war. Maritime safety, food safety, radiation safety, energy safety, and safety from weapons of mass destruction. We're already restoring maritime safety and food security, and I thank Mr. Antonio Guterres for his personal involvement. Algeria, Ethiopia, Egypt, Libya, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, Tunisia, Bangladesh, Israel, India, Iran, Yemen, Cyprus, China, Korea, Lebanon, Turkey, Belgium, Bulgaria, Greece, Ireland, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, Germany, Romania, and France have already received Ukrainian agricultural products. And we have to increase the supply by sea, both under market conditions and within the UN food program, for which Ukraine is always a reliable partner. And by the way, despite all the difficulties caused by the war, we decided to provide humanitarian aid to Ethiopia and Somalia. So we will send them an additional amount of our wheat, but it's more difficult with other security elements. On the eve of the General Assembly meeting, Russia fired missiles at the South Ukraine nuclear power plant. The explosion hit the station buildings. Windows were broken. Walls were damaged. The rockets exploded only 300 meters from the walls of the reactors. And this is after the IAEA's clear appeal to Russia to stop any hostile activity against any nuclear facilities of Ukraine, and in particular against the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, the largest one in Europe, which Russia has turned into a target. And that makes all of you a target. Russian radiation blackmailing is something that should concern each and every one of you, because none of you will find a vaccine against radiation sickness. The cost of living crisis continues in dozens of countries. It roots in the destabilization of the energy market. It's necessary to remove the main factor of global price turbulence, namely Russian energy blackmailing. It's necessary to cap the prices at which Russia exports its energy resources. It's necessary to make Russian oil and gas just ordinary goods again. Currently, oil and gas are Russia's energy weapons. And that is why it manipulates the markets so that electricity, gas, petrol, and diesel become the privilege of few instead of being a common goods available to all. Limiting prices is safeguarding the world. This is the way to restore energy and price security. But will the world go for it? Or will it be scared? Will it be scared of Russian threats? It's necessary to take only one strong step, after which everything will become clear. The time has come for this. This step will put everything in place. After the Russian missile terror, after the massacres, after Mariupol, after the burning of the Ukrainian prisoners in Olenivka by the Russian military, after blocking the ports, after the strikes of the Russian tanks and missiles on nuclear power plants, and after threats to use nuclear weapons, which have become the rule, not the exception for Russian propagandists. We must finally recognize Russia as the state of sponsor of terrorism at all levels, in all countries that confess the values of peace and protection of human life, legally, politically. If you don't have a legal mechanism, you can make a political decision in the parliaments. This is the foundation for restoring global security. If this strong step is taken, doubts will disappear whether to take other important steps. And what is very sensitive is the border, the territorial integrity. When one country tries to steal the territory of another state, it puts all of the world nation under attack. Global security cannot be restored without restoring the territorial integrity of the nation which suffered the armed aggression. So the third item of the Ukrainian peace formula is the restoration of security and territorial integrity. The fourth item is security guarantees. Every nation has the right to security guarantees, not only the largest nations, not only the most fortunate ones. We have proposals to upgrade the security architecture for Ukraine and for Europe and the world, which will not allow any more aggression against us. We are already presenting them to partners. Proposals for legally binding multilateral and bilateral treaties. These are the conditions for the guarantors to act and the timeline for their actions to bring results on land, at sea, and in the air, in diplomacy and politics, in economy and finance, in providing weapons and intelligence. Each of you who will receive the text of our peace formula will also see the details of what we offer as security guarantees. I do not want to compare our offers with the guarantees of any alliances that exist on the planet now. I want to stress that it is always much better to guarantee the security of a nation preventively rather than to stop a war after it has already begun. And the fifth item of the Ukrainian peace formula is the determination, something without which the other four items will not work. This is our determination to fight. This is the determination of the partners to help us and also themselves. And this is the determination of the world to unite around the one who fights against armed aggression and to call to order the one who threatens all. So, all 5 items of our formula: punishment for aggression, protection of life, restoration of security and territorial integrity, security guarantees, and determination to defend oneself. This is the formula of crime and punishment, which is already well known to Russia. And this is the formula of justice and law, an order that Russia has yet to learn, as well as any potential aggressors. What is not in our formula? Neutrality. Those who speak of neutrality when human values and peace are under attack mean something else. They talk about indifference, everyone for themselves. Here is what they say. They pretend to be interested in each other's problems. They take care of each other formally. They sympathize only for protocol. And that is why they pretend to protect someone, but in reality, they protect only their vested interests. This is what creates the conditions for war. This is what needs to be corrected in order to create conditions for peace. All you need is determination. There was a lot of talking about reforming the UN. How did all end? No result. If you look carefully at our peace formula, you will see that its implementation is already becoming a de facto reform of the United Nations. Our formula is universal and unites the North and the South of the world. It calls for the world's majority and encourages to expand the representation of those who remained unheard. This is an imbalance when Africa, Latin America, most of Asia, Central and Eastern Europe comply with the right of veto that they themselves never had. And this is what Ukraine is talking about. And have you ever heard such words from Russia? But it's a permanent member of the Security Council. For some reason. For what reason? No Japan or Brazil, no Turkey or India, no Germany or Ukraine. The day will come when this will be resolved. As for the talks between Ukraine and Russia, probably you have happened to hear different words from Russia about the talks, as if they were ready for them. But they talk about the talks, but announce military mobilization. They talk about the talks, but announce pseudo-referendums in the occupied territories of Ukraine. What is true then? The military mobilization in Russia is true. Sham referendums are also true. Russia wants war, it's true, but Russia will not be able to stop the course of history. Mankind and the international law are stronger than one terrorist state. Russia will be forced to end this war. The war, it has started. I rule out that the settlement can happen on a different basis than the Ukrainian peace formula. The further the Russian terror reaches, the less likely it's that anyone in the world will agree to sit at one table with them. And if my words will be followed by new Russian missiles and acts of terrorism, it will only prove their weakness. Russia's weakness, its inability to prevail over us, its inability to prevail over the world. It will only prove that 5 items of the Ukrainian peace formula must be implemented as soon as possible. We are ready for peace, but true, honest, and fair peace. That's why the world is on our side. And finally, I want to thank 101 countries that voted for my video address to take place. It was a vote not only about the format, it was the vote about principles. Only 7 countries voted against: Belarus, Cuba, North Korea, Eritrea, Nicaragua, Russia, and Syria. 7 who are afraid of the video address. 7 who respond to principles with a red button. Only 7. 101 and 7. France, if this coalition is against our determination, then I congratulate you all, because this means that peace will prevail over any aggression and that there is no obstacle for us to implement the peace formula. I thank you for your attention. Once again, I wish you all peace. Slava Ukraini!
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Ukraine for his statement just made. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Alexander Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Alexander Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Esteemed President of the General Assembly, distinguished Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great honor to address you on behalf of the Republic of Serbia. Due to limited time, please do not mind if I skip the burden of formality, courtesy words, greetings of those who are present in this room or absent, and instead speak directly about the essence of what we gather here. I've been so many times in these premises. The seriousness of the present moment obliges me to share difficult but true words with you. Everything we are doing here today seems at least relatively impotent and vague. Our words make hollow and empty echo comparing to the reality we are facing. And that reality is such that no one is listening to anyone here. No one strives towards real agreements and to resolving problems. And almost everyone takes care only of their own interests, breaching often along the way the basic principles of international law, throwing away the UN Charter and other documents this organization is founded on. It is neither fault of Antonio Guterres nor of anyone from UN, but of those powers who take care of nothing else but of meeting their own political, economic, and unfortunately, military goals. We are witnesses that the age we live in is featured by complexity of global geopolitical situation. Our general debate is being held in terms of undermined world peace to the extent that has not been seen ever since the World War II and since the time the United Nations had been founded. Global challenges we are facing are threatening to radically change international security architecture and jeopardize established international legal order. Such complex times demand a lot of wisdom and unity, in order to preserve peace as the absolutely most important heritage woven into the foundations of the United Nations organization. That is why I would like to speak clearly and accurately before you about 5 key challenges we are facing today. Point 1, returning to peace and preservation of global stability. Point 2, preservation of territorial integrity and sovereignty of internationally recognized states, members of this organization, as a key principle of international public law and relations between the countries. Point 3, energy security in terms of global crisis. Point 4, financial safety of the poor and developing countries. And point 5, food supply in terms of global supply chains interrupted by war. Current global developments remind us more and more often that the principle of peaceful resolution of disputes has no alternative. This principle is outstanding today more than ever before, and it is best described in the UN Charter preamble, which reads as follows: to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. Denial of use of force and peaceful resolution of disputes are the pillars of world stability, but they must be accompanied by principles such as non-selective observance of the UN Charter, implementation of mandatory UN Security Council resolutions, and basic principles of the applicable international public law. Point 2, preservation of territorial integrity and sovereignty of internationally recognized states, members of this organization. Serbia supports territorial integrity of all UN member states, including, of course, territorial integrity of Ukraine. In such a way, we behaved responsibly and seriously in this renowned institution. Nevertheless, we could hear from many speakers the stories about aggression and violation of territorial integrity of Ukraine. Many say that this was the first conflict on the European soil after the World War II. But the truth that the territorial integrity of a country in Europe, Serbia, as a matter of fact, which did not attack any other sovereign country, was violated, is constantly unspoken. We ask for a clear answer to the question I've been asking my interlocutors, leaders of many countries for years. What is the difference between the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and sovereignty and territorial integrity of Serbia, which was grossly violated and for which you provided international recognition and legitimacy, at least some of you? Nobody has ever provided a rational answer to this question. Let me remind you, Serbia has not stepped its foot on someone else's territory, never ever, nor has it endangered territorial integrity of a single sovereign state, so that anyone might intervene or carry out aggression against it, the way it was done against Serbia in 1999. Nevertheless, as I said, it did not prevent 19 richest NATO countries from attacking a sovereign country without a decision by the United Nations Security Council. Signing of the agreement with NATO upon termination of armed conflict, whose provisions envisaged adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1244, and which confirmed and guaranteed partial sovereignty and full territorial integrity of Serbia, did not prevent many Western countries from unilateral recognition of independence of the so-called Kosovo and from violating once again territorial integrity of our country and violating the UN Charter and the UN Resolution 1244. Precisely for such developments that Serbia experienced and has been experiencing, I'm convinced that I'm fully entitled to quote in this place the words of great Martin Luther King: "Injustice anywhere is threat to justice everywhere." These words are carved like a reminder, but as a warning to all of us. Regardless of the fact that we still feel the consequences of the gross violation of basic provisions of international public law, we do not give up on United Nations foundation principles. We shall keep advocating consistent observance of the principle of inviolability of borders respect for sovereignty and integrity of all other UN member states. Despite such position of ours, many in this room have issues with respecting territorial integrity of Serbia. You wonder why? Because they have the power in their hands, and in their eyes, we are small and weak. However, as you could hear and as you could see, we do have the strength to tell the truth, even here. Your Excellencies, we owe special gratitude to all those UN member states, and they currently constitute majority at this assembly, who support territorial integrity of the Republic of Serbia, particularly in the space and territory of Kosovo and Metohija. It is additionally encouraging that number of countries who support Serbia's position increased in period between two sessions, which is a trend that must continue because it is of utmost importance to remain loyal to basic principles embedded into the UN Charter, such as the principle of unviolability of borders. The Republic of Serbia and I, as its president, search very patiently and with a lot of good will for compromise regarding Kosovo and Metohija under the auspices of the European Union and within Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. It is a difficult process. It has been lasting for more than 10 years, but we see no alternative to it. It is better to negotiate for 100 years than to wage war for a single day. I hope that we will reach mutually acceptable solution based on compromise, because this is the absolutely only way for reaching our goal, which is a long-lasting peace as a prerequisite of prosperous life for Serbs and Albanians in an entire region. We have exhausted all other options, and speaking for Serbia at least, we do not even dream about going back to the paths of conflicts and bloodshed. The Balkan region could not stand another conflict. I rely on goodwill and understanding from our international partners, because they know well that some earlier decisions by their governments had been bad and that they had not been acting in favor of the future of our region and world peace. Belgrade is running this process under very complex circumstances, with elements of hybrid war and dirty campaigning part of international community against our country in different fields. It would be enough just to remind you of the quotes and allegations of world media that Serbia would attack its neighbors and that Serbia was a threat to regional stability. Of course, it has never happened. And it was only one among numerous lies against the Republic of Serbia. Serbia was featured as a potential destabilizing factor in the region, only to be prevented from telling the truth, that the principle of unviolability of borders must be equally applicable to all. Serbia was, and it will be, a factor of stability in the entire region. And Serbia, despite many untruths and forgeries, supports Dayton peace accords, territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the integrity of Republika Srpska within Bosnia and Herzegovina. On the other hand, we are convinced that the nations of the Balkans do have the capacity to continue their lives in the future as friends and partners with common vision of membership to the United Europe. I know this well because we have already surpassed many barriers that had been standing between our nations for years and that had costed us thousands of lives and wasted future. Serbia and Albania, for example, today have the closest and the friendliest relationship in the entire several centuries long common history in the space of the Balkan Peninsula. It took only clear-headed and pragmatic discussions about our future, not about our past, to talk about how to resolve problems that were bothering our people, our companies, workers, students, and entrepreneurs. We had discussed a lot and reached by ourselves numerous solutions that have already canceled barriers that existed between us for no rational reasons. First of all, in economy, trade, and flow of people and capital. Serbia, Albania, and North Macedonia have been implementing for 3 years Open Balkan Initiative, which has a clear vision to open the region for the people, goods, services, capital, and companies in order to create a space which would be permanently liberated from tensions and conflicts. In addition to unquestionable common economic benefit that this initiative brings, it has a broader dimension, First of all, in connecting people with different cultures and in promoting diversity, which by all means contributes to general development of society in this part of Europe. In this way, Serbia actually continues contributing to peace, stability, and reconciliation process in the region, whereby it certainly gives significant contribution to global security. We found the inspiration for the respective in words of one of the greatest diplomats in history and the great UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, that this organization was not created to take mankind into paradise, but rather to save humanity from hell. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we curbed the global pandemic, we have already faced new, unprecedented challenges for this century. While we, as a mankind, take one step at a time in accelerated technological development, there are existential problems ahead of us, such as energy security, financial safety of the developing countries, but also distortions in the supply chains of the basic food provisions. Solidarity, which can be necessary in fighting pandemic, is needed to a far greater extent today when people's basic necessities for food and energy are endangered. The Republic of Serbia thinks of its energy security as of the inseparable part of the national security and as the key prerequisite for the continuation of economic development and progress of our country. We strive to provide a continuity of energy supply, but we share the concern for current geopolitical challenges that undermine the energy stability in the world and Europe. We remain committed to finding solutions that might have the transformational strength in attempts to reach regional and European energy safety. I would like to underline that the Republic of Serbia managed to preserve continuity in energy supply during the ongoing crisis. Nevertheless, we remain vitally interested in diversifying supply sources in additional investment in energy infrastructure, but also in faster and more efficient development of capacities based on renewables. It is precisely at the United Nations where we named the ongoing decade the decade of more sustainable and resilient future, action and transformation. It has to remain like that, but at a bit faster pace. Unequal development, but also financial perils in the developing countries cause additional social layering and inevitably bring new antagonisms. Equal development must neither be limited, not conditioned, either geographically or politically, but it must be provided to all people regardless of ethnic, racial, cultural, or religious affiliation. There is another very important challenge ahead, which we must overcome together, and it is finding the most efficient way to avoid consequences of the current international crisis inflicted on global food supply security. Developments are highly alarming, and the reality is such that all of us, with no exceptions, are struck by them. Growing prices of food and its availability have become an additional problem. The task for all of us is to find operational and efficient solutions that will leave no one behind. It is up to us, states, as the most important international subjects, to involve individually in coordination of measures, first of all by contributing to this noble task at national levels in order to preserve the most valuable things, human lives and their dignity. The topic of this year's general debate warns us to the problems of a moment and relatedness of international challenges. Crises we are facing remind us of the importance of open communication. It does not take much wisdom to conclude that challenges can be successfully overpowered only if their causes are properly observed. Serbia believes that it is imperative that current challenges must not deepen world divisions in any way, and that already obvious and intentional polarization at global level should make room to principles of multilateralism. I would like to underline that the Republic of Serbia take part in collective efforts for reaching sustainable development goals and implementation of the 2030 agenda. Serbia shares Secretary General's vision and future of global cooperation in a way envisaged by our common agenda, and it strongly supports inclusive, networked, and efficient multilateralism as the best tool for responding to the most urgent challenges for the mankind. Ladies and gentlemen, multilateralism, collective actions, and common responsibility are irreplaceable elements of our discussion so far. But allow me to underline that starting point for each such constructive engagement is solidarity. Finally, I would like to reiterate that the Republic of Serbia will continue being a reliable partner in achieving common goals defined within the UN framework, firmly believing that it is the best path to create a world for us and generations to come. But we must not forget that the United Nations are as strong as we respect commonly harmonized decisions and documents of these organizations. Once again, I would quote something that we heard 23 times since now. This is the sentence. The only standard we must follow is UN Charter. That's what we heard from everybody. But when we come to the case of the Republic of Serbia, then we saw that 17 out of those 23 that were speaking about UN Charter and UN resolution violated international public law and did not obey the rules created and made by the United Nations. I hope that we'll be able to overcome all these difficulties and to make it equal, the rules and procedures for everybody in the world. Otherwise, I don't see the exit at the end of a tunnel. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me, and yeah, I hope that we'll be able to overcome all the difficulties. Long live Serbia! Živela Srbija!
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Serbia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Serene Highness, Prince Albert II, Sovereign Prince of the Principality of Monaco. I request protocol to escort His Serene Highness. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Serene Highness, Prince Albert II, Sovereign Prince of the Principality of Monaco, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président,
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to say how pleased I am to be here with you, because at a time when 2 years have passed since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, this unprecedented health crisis revealed our fault lines in multilateral cooperation and coordination. It forced us to take extraordinary social and economic measures, both to protect our people and also to mobilize international monetary system. Our frenetic day-to-day existence means that we forget that in the Northern Hemisphere, the overshoot day arrives earlier every year, and it should alert us to the fact that what we are imposing on the planet, whose resources we are inexorably exhausting. Yes, indeed, President, the theme that you've chosen for this general debate today reminds us that we are indeed at a watershed moment that requires transformative solutions to address interlocking challenges before us. President, allow me to express my warmest congratulations to you on your election to preside over the 77th session of the General Assembly, and also to thank your predecessor who demonstrated the leadership of a small island developing state. We share your conviction regarding the need to achieve the SDGs that we defined collectively in 2015, and also preserve, in so doing, our environment and ensure the survival of humanity. This 77th General Assembly marks a decisive year for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Rest assured of full support of the Principality of Monaco in the preparation for important upcoming deadlines. I'm thinking particularly about the Conference on Water, the SDG Summit, and the Summit of the Future in 2024. President, exactly 100 years ago, Prince Albert I passed away, my great-great-grandfather. This humanist and visionary sovereign advocated tirelessly for the fundamental role of science to drive social progress, particularly within the framework of political decision making. A century later, we are commemorating his legacy, which continues to inspire my action and the policies of my government. Monaco is playing its role in collective efforts to preserve our planet at a time when the world is at a point where our ways of living are being turned upside down, as well as international relations. President, globalization that we're currently experiencing has accentuated our independence, but also the ties between humankind and nature. Ecosystems are currently unable to regenerate because of our modes of production, which are mainly focused on the use of natural resources and the frenetic rate of consumption. That 2020 was the only pause in the degradation of global ecosystems speaks volumes as to what we are collectively able to accomplish, for better or worse, either in an emergency fashion or more long term. Indeed, when faced with an emergency, research and innovation allowed for rapid production of vaccines, which we very much welcome. Questions of public health and preparations for other pandemics remains a priority, much like equitable access to prevention and care. I attach particular importance to ensuring that my country rallies its international cooperation policy alongside its partners. First and foremost, the World Health Organization, in order to strengthen the global health architecture. We will therefore look very closely at any new crisis management mechanism which could facilitate a coordinated response based on verified science so that we do not repeat the difficulties faced at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. President, it's been for the 3 decades now that the IPCC has been warning us about the disastrous, often irreversible effects of climate change. In June last year, in the conferences in Stockholm and Lisbon, we once again saw the intrinsic link between the well-being of human civilization and respect for the planet, including the ocean as one of its key components. The protection of our seas and oceans is part of a family tradition, a cause for which Prince Albert I dedicated his life. His commitment is an example to me. An example that lives on in the commitments of my country and that I've chosen myself to follow since I acceded to the throne in 2005. Beyond our speeches and words, it is high time to move towards action. This is nothing more or less than an issue of taking the last opportunity we have to build a future for humanity. While extreme climate events are multiplying, affecting indiscriminately all nations, but particularly punishing the most vulnerable, strengthening adaptation measures must be at the heart of our priorities. I'm thinking particularly for the people of Pakistan suffering of the consequences of terrible flooding. These urgent and crucial efforts must be carried out in concerted way with policies that seek to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions and reverse the trend of biodiversity loss by 2030. Every country, depending on its own circumstances and needs, must radically transform its economy in order to decarbonize and contain the rise in temperatures. Monaco remains resolutely committed to protect the environment and also to sustainable development. Thus, the Principality is continuing its energy transition to achieve a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 55% by 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality in 2050. In this connection, the most recent report from the IPBES is very clear. Tools and solutions to build a sustainable and fairer future for future generations already exist. We need to implement them. A duty of solidarity is required so that we can collectively manage to succeed in this energy transition. Upcoming deadlines in 2020, both within the Climate Convention and that on biological diversity, must allow us to really pave the way for sustainable societies. When faced with such challenges, a failure would be simply unacceptable. President, Prince Albert I was my great-great-grandfather in my eyes, an example of being open to others. He was keen to learn and listen to the most cutting-edge of minds. And giving the Principality a constitution, he made it a constitutional state. And while the First World War was on the horizon, he sought tirelessly to convince the future warring parties to find a peaceful solution to their disputes. Today, at a time when numerous conflicts continue to sow terror, despair, and chaos around the world without us being able to stop them, war has unfortunately returned to the European continent. The military aggression against Ukraine is flagrantly flouting international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter, undermining the security and stability of Europe and of the world. It is inflicting, inter alia, on the unutterable suffering on the Ukrainian people, which remind us of the darkest hours of our history. Indeed, I welcome the conclusion of an agreement on the aegis of the United Nations allowing for the export of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea, and we urge all stakeholders to respect the terms of this. Global food security, which was already precarious, depends on it. Let us not forget either that women and children remain the main victims of food scarcity, and this exacerbates a vicious and intergenerational cycle of poverty. Monaco has made this issue one of its priorities for cooperation and allocates almost a third of its ODA to this. We are resolutely committed in the long term to fight malnutrition, to supporting small-scale local producers, school canteens, and to develop sustainable agriculture. President, the extreme tensions that are continuing to expand, and we know the number of conflicts around the world, or the number of civil wars around the world, which is a terrifying number. This means that we need to recast our peace agenda. In his speech, President Macron mentioned these high number of civil wars. So there's a great change marked by globalizations, and this is now followed by digitalization of our societies. While this is an area where the private sector plays a leading role, it is indeed this area, technologies and ICTs. In this connection, we must reconcile development of these technologies with the protection of human rights and personal data. President, the summit that brings us together here at the start of this week also demonstrated that new technologies are at the basis of transforming education. We must use this well in order to adapt our education systems around the world to today's world and the world of tomorrow. I want to thank the Secretary General for this initiative, which saw a high number of young people participating. Cyberspace cannot become an area of clashes, but on the contrary, should be a further opportunity for cooperation. The proliferation of hate speech and disinformation is quite simply intolerable. Artificial intelligence should benefit humankind and should not manipulate its behavior and way of thinking. It is high time that we established shared rules that cyberspace doesn't go out of control, doesn't destroy our democracy, and doesn't further separate us from each other. President, at the end of the general debate of this 77th session, more than 2/3 of the members of the General Assembly will have been represented by their head of state or government. Here, I wish to see a reaffirmation of the crucial role played by the United Nations of the Charter and also of multilateral diplomacy. We must step up our efforts to re-establish trust so that, as the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, is a recognition of the inherent dignity of all members of the human family and their equal and inalienable rights constitutes the foundation of liberty, justice, and peace around the world. Strengthened and effective multilateralism, where young people and women will play a leading role, is the most effective way of addressing global crises. Because women are key players for change, gender equality and economic empowerment of women are the foundation of a more sustainable world. What are we waiting for, then, to promote their place in global leadership? Monaco plans on continuing its commitment within the work of UN Women through its development cooperation policy. My delegation plans on contributing to the work of our organizations to together build more efficient and more inclusive multilateralism, working for the well-being of humanity and of the planet. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Sovereign Prince of the Principality of Monaco for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Serene Highness. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Charles Angelo Savarin, President of the Commonwealth of Dominica. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Charles Angelo Savarin, President of the Commonwealth of Dominica, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. General Secretary, Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, warmest greetings and a very pleasant good afternoon to you all. Mr. President, my delegation, and by extension, the government and people of the Commonwealth of Dominica, congratulate you on your election to the presidency of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly and wish you every success during your tenure. We also express appreciation and gratitude to your predecessor, His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, for the able manner in which he presided over the 76th session. Mr. President, permit me to express my deepest condolences to His Majesty King Charles III, to the royal family, and to the government and people of the United Kingdom on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty was a symbol of stability and continuity, not only to the United Kingdom, but to the Commonwealth and the world at large. Mr. President, this 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly is being convened at a time when we are faced with innumerable challenges which have both current and long-term implications. These include climate change, degradation of our ecosystem and loss of biodiversity, poverty, inequality, and a growing challenge of chronic, non-communicable diseases. All of these have occupied the attention of this august body over the years, with only marginal progress in finding solutions for resolving these major challenges. Compounding these challenges are other emerging threats, such as the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the unfolding war in Ukraine. Mr. President, the invasion of one country by another must always be condemned, and Dominica has condemned the invasion of Ukraine without reservation. In this interconnected world, what happens in one part of the world affects us all, and so it is with the war in Ukraine. We are all victims of the skyrocketing prices of oil and petroleum products and the resultant impact on the cost of electricity and on all aspects of transportation. The cost of production of goods and services is similarly adversely affected, and as Russia and Ukraine are among the leading suppliers of grain, this conflict has created a shortage in the world's supply of grain, with implications for hunger in countries which rely on imports of grain from these two countries. The developments since 2014, which have led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in 2021 are well known. Nevertheless, we in Dominica are of the view that this invasion and the ensuing war could have been avoided. The Commonwealth of Dominica, therefore, stands with the rest of the world in calling for an immediate cessation to the conflict which continues to rage in Ukraine. Mr. President, the Commonwealth of Dominica welcomes the deal which was brokered between Ukraine and Russia with the assistance of Turkey, ably supported by the United Nations Secretary General, to have significant quantities of grain shipped from Ukrainian ports to various destinations and thereby alleviate the emerging global food crisis. For these reasons, and in the interest of global peace, the Commonwealth of Dominica urges all parties to continue upholding the end of this agreement so that further relief can be felt globally as a result. Mr. President, like most member states, we in Dominica and the Caribbean were ill prepared to deal with COVID-19, which in March of 2020 was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization. Notwithstanding the fact that most countries managed to contain the COVID-19 pandemic and consequently have eased COVID-19 restrictions, public health experts have warned that the pandemic is not yet over. Furthermore, with new variants continuing to emerge, COVID-19 continues to pose a threat to the global community. This pandemic has exposed the limitations of health systems in all countries, large or small, developed or underdeveloped. The reality is that not all people have equal access to vaccines and life-saving medicines, even when faced with a pandemic declared by the World Health Organization. This year's theme, a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges, is analogous to the approach and trajectory outlined by the United Nations towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. Member states have individually embraced the SDGs as the ideal to be universally pursued and achieved by 2030. Small island developing states are more challenged than most to achieve these goals. The international community has pledged its support. However, the question is, to what extent has tangible support been forthcoming? The challenge is to go beyond promises, commitments, and pledges to effective delivery and implementation. The various global crises do not respect national borders. Our interconnected world means that no one is insulated or immune from developments which take place anywhere on this planet. Today, planet Earth is under severe threat and stress and may very well become uninhabitable if we further delay decisive corrective action. We need to talk less and start taking those concrete and sustainable actions needed in order to reduce carbon emissions into the atmosphere. In addition to tropical storms and hurricanes, we are facing the prospect of drought, warming seas, and rising sea levels, all of which will affect lives and livelihoods. For this very reason, we continue to champion the call for collective global action to build the resilience of our small island states to natural disasters which are triggered and exacerbated by our changing climate. We must lay a path for development that is sustainable and people-focused. Over several years, small states like ours have stood at this very podium and at many other such podiums across the world, seeking to convince the developed world to change destructive practices that threaten our planet and our very lives and livelihoods. Yet, despite our best efforts, not enough corrective action is being taken. Not enough support is being given to us to adapt and build resilience to the impacts of climate change that are already upon us. I will not stand here today to detail to you the ways in which climate change is affecting us. These are well known. We see the news reports, the evidence is all around us. What we need from our developed partners in this United Nations family is a recognition and acceptance of responsibility that translates to a commitment to provide the funding that is required to enable our small states to become resilient. This must be readily accessible and available to all of us on grant and concessional terms, with the only criteria for access being our vulnerability to extreme weather events. Mr. President, we have spoken here before of the cataclysmic impact of successive disasters on our country. Tropical Storm Erica in 2015 and Hurricane Maria in 2017 caused over 90% and 220% loss of GDP respectively, with lives lost, people displaced, and livelihoods shattered. These experiences triggered our goal of becoming the first climate resilient nation in the world and has realigned our focus to concentrate on adaptation efforts and build back better in every sector of the economy. Our small island developing states are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change, a phenomenon which will continue to escalate with every increment of global warming. Mr. President, as sea levels rise, some small island states will eventually disappear, while others will experience coastal erosion and will ultimately destroy infrastructure, villages, towns, and cities. The Commonwealth of Dominica therefore reiterates its call to the international community to prioritize at COP27 the disbursement of climate financing to seeds to support our adaptation and resiliency efforts as we seek to minimize loss and damage from extreme climate events. In this way, actions will reflect more equitably and justice-oriented responses towards fulfilling the goals and promises of sustainable development. Furthermore, the continuous call for higher levels of commitment towards climate justice must be reflected in tangible and effective responses. Mr. President, 2 months ago, at this very headquarters, the Commonwealth of Dominica presented its first voluntary national review in keeping with our international obligation and in the spirit of global governance. Dominica reported on the tremendous progress accomplished, both in terms of the advances made towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and our national agenda, guided by the vision of becoming the world's first climate resilient nation. As we continue to recover from the destructive weather events already mentioned, Dominica's main economic industries are showing signs of positive recovery. Tourism and agriculture remain the main income-generating sectors, with GDP projected to reach pre-pandemic levels by 2023, averaging 5% growth per annum from 2022 to 2026. Tourism recovery has been supported by new infrastructure projects and improved and increased air access. Mr. President, at the center of Dominican's resilience agenda are our citizens. Across Dominica, new and modern climate-resistant homes are being constructed for low and middle-income families, while modern and smart health and wellness centers have been constructed and equipped in urban and rural communities. This will allow them to withstand the impact from extreme weather and remain operational while also strengthening response to other natural emergencies and pandemics. In that regard, the Commonwealth of Dominica takes this opportunity to commend the government of the People's Republic of China for its commitment to add a further $42 billion to the new Global Development and South-South Cooperation Fund. This will assist countries like Dominica that are on the front line of the negative impacts of climate change to accelerate the realization of the 2030 agenda. Mr. President, ensuring our citizens enjoy long and healthy lives will always be a priority. Therefore, we grow and consume what we grow and consume has to be a critical component of our resilience agenda. Global trends indicate that issues surrounding food security are not unique to Dominica. Indeed, the SDG 2, Zero Hunger, calls on governments to pursue smart and sustainable food production to help alleviate the perils of hunger. Dominica is working to strengthen its agricultural sector to reduce on the importation of its food import bill. There is renewed emphasis on growing what we eat and eating what we grow, while at the same time ensuring that there is affordable and high quality produce for export on a consistent basis. Our aim is to develop a scientific and practical approach to reducing the vulnerability of farmers and fisherfolk through the adoption of resilient and sustainable practices. Mr. President, we embrace this signing as our international obligation towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons as outlined in the United Nations Charter for the Maintenance of International Peace and Security. Dominica therefore calls on all states who have nuclear weapons to abide by international law for the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and the use of diplomacy as a tool towards conflict resolution. Mr. President, the trade and economic embargo imposed against our brothers and sisters in Cuba continues to be of great concern to us in the Caribbean, and the lifting of it has become more urgent in light of the global impact of the Russian-Ukraine war on food security. The Commonwealth of Dominica continues to join its voice with the voices of the overwhelming majority of members of this global organization to call for the immediate lifting of the unjustified trade restrictions and export bans imposed on the good people of Cuba. It has long been established that whatever the objectives were 60 years ago, when this embargo was instituted, it can no longer be justified if it ever was. The government of Dominica therefore strongly urges the few states who continue to support these sanctions to heed the call of the overwhelming majority of us gathered here and lift this archaic and unfair embargo against Cuba. And let us all support the full integration of the Cuban people into the global financial and trading systems. For decades, Cuba has been training medical doctors, nurses, engineers, and other professionals, as well as providing technical assistance to developing countries as part of its South cooperation. Cuba also offers professional training in various disciplines to thousands of students from all over the developing world. Additionally, Cuba continues to add its voice to the fight against terrorism and drug trafficking in the Caribbean and the rest of the world. We therefore join all other member states who have called for the removal of Cuba from the list of countries that sponsor terrorism, and we ask instead that we redirect our efforts to combating the real threats to global peace and security in the region. In March of 2015, Mr. President, the United States of America declared Venezuela as posing an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States and imposed sanctions on that country. The United States has been followed by a number of countries in imposing sanctions, and since then, the good people of Venezuela have been enduring severe hardships and sufferings from the imposition of numerous financial and economic sanctions. The consequences of these sanctions prevent millions of Venezuelans from meeting the most basic needs, made even worse by the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, further impacting Venezuela's contracted economy and an already weakened health system. The Commonwealth of Dominica again joins with the voices of many other members of this global organization to call for the immediate lifting of the unjustified oil embargo and other general sanctions imposed on the people of Venezuela. The political, economic, social, and humanitarian crisis in Venezuela demands immediate attention. It is further incumbent upon all of us to provide short and long-term solutions and opportunities for Venezuela to resolve its challenges and quickly improve the lives of ordinary Venezuelans. Mr. President, the current situation in Haiti continues to be of great concern to us and demands greater international attention. An editorial in the Washington Post on the 6th of August 2020 called for muscular international intervention. This was followed on the 8th of August 2022 by a statement from the Secretary General of the Organization of American States reproaching the international community for its failure over the years in assisting Haiti and leaving the country in chaos. Mr. President, Haiti is a country which was once the wealthiest colony in the Americas. It is now the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. The magnitude 7.0 earthquake of 2010 left the country totally devastated. It claimed some 250,000 lives and over 300,000 injured, and laid waste the capital of Port-au-Prince and most of southern Haiti. there was an estimated cost of US $8 billion in damage and a reconstruction cost of approximately US $14 billion. Currently, Mr. President, some 1.3 million people are said by the United Nations agencies to be suffering from food insecurity in Haiti, and some 4.6 million from limited access to basic food supplies. While I am pleased to acknowledge the recent meeting of lead heads of governments of CARICOM that took place in Trinidad and Tobago to specifically find solutions to the many crises which beset Haiti, the international community needs to respond as if Haiti was under invasion, as is the case with Ukraine, or as it did in the post-war reconstruction situation, as was the case with Europe after World War II, requiring a so-called Marshall Plan. Nothing less can overcome the deep-rooted reconstruction challenges facing Haiti. We therefore urge the United Nations family to forge an effective, unified response that brings to bear the necessary resources, financial, technical, human, and otherwise, to alleviate the sufferings of the Haitian people. Mr. President, the severe and voluminous impacts of the various challenges that we have been experiencing in recent times highlights the importance of multilateralism. As we raise the various issues confronting our individual states and share our hopes, fears, and expectations, let us seek also to offer solutions to our various problems as a united international community, eager to realize a sustainable, transformative, and fairer future for all. As I conclude, Mr. President, allow me to reiterate my country's gratitude to all of our international partners and friendly governments who have stood with the Commonwealth of Dominica, particularly through our darkest days, following the major tropical storms and hurricanes which afflicted us. Our journey is one of building back better, sustainability, and resilience, and with your continued support, we look forward to a brighter future in the days ahead. Mr. President, I wish you all and all delegates at this 77th session every success in their deliberations. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Commonwealth of Dominica for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. We shall now continue the general debate. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mohammed Najib Azmi Mikati, President of the Council of Ministers of the Lebanese Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have the great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Mohammed Najib Azmi Mikati, President of the Council of the Ministers of the Lebanese Republic. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, heads of state, government, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to extend to you, Mr. President, my warmest congratulations on your assumption of the presidency of the General Assembly at its 77th session. I also take this opportunity to thank His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid for his good stewardship of the previous session and for all his effort in this regard. I would also like to commend His Excellency, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, for his continued work to promote the role of the United Nations and to develop its work. The world today is at a very delicate stage of armed conflicts and interrelated crises that are of concern to us all. There is no better place to deliberate these challenges than this hall. This hall brings together all the states of the world that are brought together by the Charter of the United Nations. My country is a proud contributor to the drafting of the Charter. We've had decades of fruitful cooperation with the United Nations. In this context, I am pleased, Mr. President, to thank you and through you, the United Nations organization, with all its branches and specialized agencies, and those in particular operating in Lebanon. I thank you for the efforts that you are making to help Lebanon and contribute to mitigating the consequences of the crippling economic and financial crisis it is undergoing. I would like also to thank the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, for its sacrifices and effort to maintain stability in southern Lebanon. This is in close coordination with the Lebanese armed forces. Here, through you, we look forward to strengthening the Lebanese armed forces' military capabilities and alleviating its financial burdens. In this context, we reaffirm Lebanon's full commitment to the full implementation of the provisions of Security Council Resolution 1701 and all the resolutions of international legitimacy. With regard to the demarcation of our maritime borders, under the auspices of the United Nations and with the commendable American mediation. Here, I would like to reaffirm Lebanon's absolute commitment to its sovereignty, rights, and wealth in its territorial waters and its exclusive economic zone. We reiterate our sincere desire to reach a negotiated solution that is long overdue. I am pleased to inform you that we have made significant progress and hope that we will soon reach the desired outcome. Lebanon is determined to protect its national interests and the well being of its people, its wealth, and to invest its national resources. We are fully aware of the importance of the promising energy market in the Eastern Mediterranean for the prosperity of the economies of the countries in the region and to meet the needs of importing countries. Mr. President, Lebanon believes in the leading role played by the United Nations. We reaffirm our commitment to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Climate Agreement. We also believe in the international frameworks that address disarmament issues in their various forms. We also welcome the work aimed at establishing an international understanding to rid the Middle East of weapons of mass destruction in implementation of General Assembly Resolution 73/546. We commend the previous sessions of the conference. We look forward also to the successful conclusion of the third session of the conference, which would be held under the presidency of Lebanon next November. We look forward to contributing to supporting the establishment of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. Mr. President, many countries in the world today are experiencing severe economic crises, the causes of which are multifaceted and well known. They've had a major impact on all aspects of life. It has made it imperative on many governments and countries to resort to extraordinary measures to try to alleviate the impact of this crisis on their peoples. As for my country, Lebanon, we have been facing for several years the worst socioeconomic crisis in our history. This crisis has affected all institutions and put the majority of Lebanese under the poverty line. It has caused the migration of many promising young cadres. Our homeland has lost the best of its young people in a brain drain. In addition to the unprecedented and severe economic deterioration, the collapse of the exchange rate of the national currency to its lowest historical levels, and the closure imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, in addition to the catastrophe of the Beirut port explosion. In this connection, we are in pursuit of the truth. This, in addition to the consequences of the Syrian crisis and the burden of the displaced. In the midst of all of this, we found ourselves facing an unprecedented political crisis, which has made it necessary to tread very slowly and carefully in a political and economic minefield to remedy the situation and establish the appropriate grounds to contribute to getting out of the crisis. Mr. President, our government has succeeded in achieving many of its goals. The most prominent of these goals include holding parliamentary elections on time, despite the difficult circumstance in the country. But the road ahead of Lebanon is still arduous, long, and full of difficulties. Before we get out of this, our might and determination to overcome it successfully. In this context, our government has signed a preliminary agreement with the International Monetary Fund. From this rostrum, we pledge to proceed with all the legislative and administrative reforms necessary to overcome our present crisis. In this context, we always count on the assistance of Lebanon's international friends, led by the brotherly Arab states, of which Lebanon is an indispensable member for identity and a founding member of the League of Arab States. Lebanon's affiliation and identity as an Arab country and its leadership in adhering to Arab causes is a translation of the provisions of its constitution and the Taif Agreement, which ended the bloody civil war that ravaged my country. I must reiterate our full commitment to this agreement and our zero tolerance of any attempt to undermine its provisions. We also reaffirm our commitment to the principle of disassociation, which we have pursued since our previous government. This is an effort to keep our country as far away as possible from what it cannot sustain. The government of Lebanon also relies on the United Nations and its member states, which, through their commendable assistance to Lebanon, have always emphasized that a capable and a prosperous Lebanese state is an urgent need for peace and security in the region and the world. In the context of efforts to address the economic crisis, our government is also working on a financial and economic recovery plan that complements our cooperation with the International Monetary Fund, and we are also working on a package of comprehensive structural and sectoral reforms that meet the requirements of the Lebanese people. It also provides them with a social safety net. We also are developing laws that ensure absolute transparency and combat the scourge of corruption. This scourge has increased as a result of the economic collapse. At the same time, we are working to relaunch the economy and to unlock its potential, especially for young people that we are responsible for. They are a beacon for hope for the success of a Lebanese economic model that is open to the world with pioneering opportunities. In this context, we appeal to brotherly and friendly countries to stand by Lebanon in its crisis, in its current ordeal, and to support it in order to get out of it and to address its serious repercussions on the Lebanese people, as well as its repercussions on the structure of the state. We look forward to reconvening of the Friends of Lebanon Conference, which has long been hosted by France in cooperation with the Friends and Brothers and Sisters of Lebanon. The existence of a sovereign and independent Lebanese state that is strong and capable, that protects the parliamentary democratic system and public and private freedoms, that believes in tolerance, fraternity, and convergence, and adopts a policy of dissociation and shuns away the policy of axis. This existence is an urgent need for security, peace, stability, and prosperity in the region. Further, a strong central government that ensures the rule of law and its proper application, as well as enabling environment for businesses, productive sectors, and services in their diversity, in accordance with market standards, free economy, and the requirement of the times and the ICT revolution. This is all an urgent need for the entire region and the best way for all of us to face the challenges of poverty, unemployment, extremism, and terrorism, and avoiding falling into the unknown. Mr. President, for more than a decade, Lebanon has been at the forefront of the global public good by hosting a massive number of displaced Syrians. It is very difficult to provide accurate figures of those displaced Syrians in Lebanon. Since the beginning of the Syrian crisis, we have adopted an open border policy out of our belief in humanitarian considerations. However, today, the displacement crisis is beyond our ability. It is also important to reaffirm that the Lebanese constitution and the consensus of all Lebanese prevent any integration or settlement naturalization on its territory. The only realistic sustainable solution is to achieve safe and dignified return for Syrians to their country within a roadmap that we should start working on as soon as possible with the cooperation of all parties. There should be also additional qualitative assistance provided to the Lebanese state and its different departments and infrastructure. The infrastructure is overstretched by the large influx of displaced persons for more than 10 years. Mr. President, the question of Palestine remains the main issue impeding the attainment of peace and stability in the Middle East. The injustice against the Palestinian people must be lifted. The sovereign and independent Palestinian state, with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital, must be realized, and the relevant international legitimacy resolutions must be implemented, including the decision and resolutions for the return of refugees. In the context of the debate on the Palestine refugees, allow me to emphasize the central role played by UNRWA in serving the goals and purposes of the UN by contributing to mitigating the suffering of the Palestine refugees and helping achieve a measure of regional development and stability. In this context, we express our deep concern at the agency's critical financial situation and the accumulated budget deficit. This jeopardizes the delivery of its services. We also reiterate Lebanon's welcome and support for all international efforts to bridge the deficit, as the biggest challenge remains finding a sustainable solution in the financing gap. To the financing gap. Mr. President, Lebanon has a long history of culture. Lebanon has always promoted a message of peace, tolerance, and dialogue. While my country is undergoing a difficult period, the difficulties will not deter Lebanon and Lebanese from moving forward to re-establish their prosperity and strengthen the pioneering role they have always played internationally. We want Lebanon to be a forum of convergence, not a forum of division. We want Lebanon to be a space for dialogue, not competition. We want it to be a spiritual custodian that brings together the values of the divine religions and the values of truth and justice in this world. I am confident that with the unity of its people and the help of its brothers and friends, we can achieve the aspired goal. In conclusion, I reiterate my thanks to the United Nations for its continued cooperation with Lebanon and its continued partnership with all member states that love and support Lebanon. And I reiterate my call to everyone to not involve Lebanon in all the conflicts in the region. The greater the challenges, the more we are willing to work together for the good of all our peoples. The recent successive crises have demonstrated the importance of international cooperation in addressing crises that are, on the whole, are transboundary in their nature. And I conclude by referring to the beginning when the UN started its work to work together in solidarity and complementarity for the benefit and well being of mankind through justice, security, peace, and sustainable development. We hope for a better world, especially in the Middle East. My best greetings to all of you. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Council of Ministers of the Lebanese Republic for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I now give the floor to His Excellency Jan Lipavsky, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Czechia.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This United Nations, its principles, which we established after the Second World War, is in grave danger. One of the presumed gatekeepers of the UN Charter, one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, Russia, is attacking a sovereign neighboring democracy and wreaking havoc in Eastern Europe and the entire world. If we continue to allow a new colonial war, then why are we here? Why do we keep this United Nations alive? Do we care or are we indifferent? Czech government's foreign policy is guided by the legacy of our former President Václav Havel, a globally respected human rights defender and a renowned politician who once said, "Our indifference towards others can after all result in only one thing, the indifference of others toward us." The fact that representatives of all UN member states are meeting here to address major global challenges manifest that we are not only indifferent to the suffering of others, it shows that we care. The circumstances have changed dramatically since our last meeting, though. The Russian invasion in Ukraine has fundamentally shaken the international order. On February 24, not only Europe, but the whole world entered a new era. Russia tries to dismantle the security architecture of the of the European continent, launching a colonial war of conquest. Ironically, President Putin declares partial mobilization and threatens the world with the use of nuclear weapons today on the UN International Day of Peace. What more proof do we need? This is our new terrifying reality. Russia's unjustifiable, unprovoked, and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine does not only blatantly violate the UN Charter, it badly damages global economy and food security of many countries gathered in this hall. It seriously threatens the rules-based international order. It harms all UN member states. I'm shocked to the core listening to the Russian state-controlled TV channels preaching the strategy of hunger and cold towards Ukraine and the world, approving the torture and mass killings of civilians with the argument that the world has to fear Russia. Russia must immediately cease its military actions and withdraw all its troops from the entire territory of Ukraine. Russia's complete disregard for the resolutions adopted by the UN General Assembly is appalling. Czechia resolutely supports Ukraine's right to defend its territorial integrity and population in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. Czechia fully supports sovereignty, unity, and independence of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. We will never recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea. We condemn in the strongest possible terms the upcoming sham referenda in parts of the Ukraine territory. We resolutely reject any attempts to create spheres of influence instead of equal partnerships. The time of establishing colonies and acquiring new territories by sheer force of arm is over. Today, it is Ukraine. Tomorrow, it could be any of us. We refuse this world of Russian colonial appetite. We are horrified by the atrocities committed by the Russian invader. We condemn the existence of filtration camps run by Russia and the horrors in Mariupol, Bucha, Irpin, Izium, and many other places in Ukraine, as well as the apocalyptic shelling of civilian infrastructure. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian citizens were deported to Russia, including children. Children forcibly taken away from their parents. It reminds us of the worst practices of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany in the first half of the 20th century. All these reports on Russian military conduct must be independently investigated. Russia must respect its obligation under the international humanitarian law. There is Russia's international responsibility for the aggression, but there is also an individual crime responsibility for the crimes committed on such a large scale by Russian troops. We will hold all war criminals accountable. Czechia supported the referral to the ICC prosecutor to open an investigation of the situation on the ground in Ukraine. We also strongly support Ukraine's application instituting the proceeding against the Russian Federation under the Genocide Convention before the International Court of Justice. And we call for establishment of a special international tribunal that will prosecute the crime of aggression committed by Putin's Russia. Apart from that, we support Ukraine comprehensively. Czechia hosts the highest number of Ukrainian refugees per capita, over 400,000 in 10 million country. We provide volumes of humanitarian aid. We support stabilization, recovery, and reconstruction efforts of the Ukrainian government, not only with words, but with action. Mr. President, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has only strengthened my country's resolve to continue supporting independent media, civil society, and human rights defenders. Inside Russia, unfortunately, the human rights situation of any freedom-loving citizens has worsened enormously. We successfully ran for the Human Rights Council seat vacated by Russia in May. I would like to thank for the broad support which we received from many of you. We warmly welcome the appointment of Mr. Volker Türk as a new High Commissioner for Human Rights. And I wish to thank former High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet for her dedicated work during her terms in office. The latest report on China documented by her office shed light on the alarming human rights violation against Muslim groups, including Uyghurs. Unfortunately, the human rights situation in countries such as Afghanistan, Cuba, Ethiopia, Iran, Myanmar, and Venezuela also continue to worsen. We wish for Myanmar to work towards a peaceful resolution of the current crisis. We follow with horror the atrocious manner in which the Iranian authorities handle the rightful protest of women. In Belarus, the regime uses brutal violence against its opponents. In the past 2 years, tens of thousands of Belarusians have been detained, all independent media and civil society organizations destroyed. We are concerned that anti-Semitism and the Holocaust denial are on the rise. This year marks 80 years since the infamous Wannsee Conference, with the so-called final solution to the Jewish question, which resulted in the murder of nearly 6 million Jews. Czechia reiterates Israel's right to protect its citizens against any terrorist activities, including rocket attacks, which deliberately target Israeli civilians. Mr. President, Czechia currently holds the presidency of the European Union. Our priorities, such as defending Ukraine, ensuring energy security, and promoting democracy and human rights, are not only regional, they are global in nature. The Russian aggression has only multiplied the already existing global challenges. The progress on the Sustainable Development Goals and the global recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic has slowed down. Prices of agricultural commodities are growing globally. For us, working with youth, listening to their concern is the driving force to get the progress on SDGs back on track. Climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss are major global challenges. We need a comprehensive humanitarian development peace-based response to crises, including pandemics and sustainable food systems and climate resilience. It is our collective responsibility to ensure the WHO can work effectively and independently of any political influence. No one should be left behind. We firmly support the global efforts for equal access to vaccines and treatments. Stakes are high at the next UN climate conference, COP27, in Egypt, which is approaching. It has been said many times before, but I will reiterate once again. If we do not act now, it might be soon too late. The development of relations between the EU and Africa is among the priorities of the Czech EU presidency. Africa is facing food shortages and negative impacts of climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. Russian aggression against Ukraine has blocked export of agricultural products. I cannot but express my outrage at how Russian disinformation propaganda is trying to use the food crisis in Africa to spread false narratives that the EU sanctions against Russia caused the shortage. Obviously, if Russia had not invaded Ukraine, we would not have had to deal with this issue at all. Mr. President, turning to other security issues, we are concerned about the increased tension in the Taiwan Strait caused by unilateral threatening actions. We expect cross-strait differences to be resolved by peaceful means, while the status quo is being maintained. The digital space carries many opportunities, but there are risks entailed too. Cyber attacks and cybercrime, misuse of technology, and in particular, disinformation. Let me say this loud and clear. A lie is not an option. For far too long, we have overlooked the spread of disinformation directed against our common values. Let us not forget the COVID-related disinformation. We had to learn the hard way when disinformation began to cost human lives. This is why we need to make sure our citizens and societies are resilient and independent media operate freely. We will continue to reach out and help countries exposed to lies and propaganda. Czechia promotes the concept of digital humanism, which keeps human interests and needs at the center of emerging technologies. Instances of internet shutdowns are growing. We must maintain a free, open, safe, secure, and stable cyberspace where human rights apply online as they do offline. The number of cyber attacks, including state-sponsored ones, continues to rise, as does their severity. New potential of terrorist threat has appeared with the escalation of Russia's aggressive policies. Terrorism maliciously feeds on weak governance, economic hardship, and social injustice, with the Sahel region being struck the most. Czechia reiterates its commitment to countering terrorism and supporting countries that suffer from terrorist violence or threat. I would like to use the opportunity to remind Russia that Czechia still awaits its official response concerning the explosion in the ammunition depot in my country in 2014. This completely appalling act was planned and executed by agents of the Russian military intelligence GRU and claimed the life of 2 innocent Czech citizens in addition to material damage. Such conduct is a clear violation of international law. Mr. President, non-proliferation of nuclear weapons is also negatively impacted by Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Russia does not hesitate to use dangerous nuclear rhetoric, which became a new standard of terrorizing peaceful populations. Czechia resolutely decries Russia's occupation of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Any armed attack on nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes constitutes a violation of the UN Charter and the statutes of the IAEA. We regret that despite lengthy negotiation, it was not possible to achieve consensus on a final outcome document of the 10th NPT review conference because Russia opposed. And we call on Iran to act urgently to fulfill its legal obligations under NPT Comprehensive Safeguard Agreement and clarify all outstanding issues. We commended the IAEA and its Director General for their professional work in verifying Iran's safeguards obligations. Mr. President, this United Nations, this universal organization has a duty to help us better react to existing and emerging global challenges. But in these dark and stormy times, it has the duty to firmly defend the principles it was founded on: the UN Charter, human rights, and rules-based international order. Thank you very much.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Czechia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Bruno Eduardo Rodriguez Parilla, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Cuba.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, delegates, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare, like never before, the true essence of the unjust and unsustainable prevailing international order. Never has humankind had this wealth of scientific and technical potential that it has now. Neither has it ever had the extraordinary capacity that it does now to create wealth and well-being. And however, never before has the world been so unequal in terms of just how much people suffer. 828 million people, 10% of the world population, are going hungry, and around 50 million children suffer from stunting, the most deadly form of malnutrition. Unemployment will affect 207 million persons in 2022, 21 million more than in 2019. In the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, 773 million human beings do not know how to read or write. Around 6.5 million people have died as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Vaccinations to tackle this crisis are inaccessible to billions of people in low-income countries. In 2021, pharmaceutical multinationals earned $850 billion. External debt has been paid several times over, and nevertheless, it is growing. Paradoxically, military expenditure at a global level is growing at a dizzying pace, and for the first time now exceeds $2 trillion. Nothing justifies the fact that humankind continues to remain threatened by the existence of around 13,000 nuclear weapons. We champion the universalization of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. How much more could we maybe do if these resources were devoted to promoting health and development? How many deaths as a result of COVID and other diseases might have been avoided? How many boys and girls would be spared hunger and preventable illnesses? Mr. President, greenhouse gases reached record levels in 2021, and the same will occur this year. The average sea level has reached a new high. The last 7 years are the warmest ever recorded in history. We cannot continue to fail to heed the alarm bells that are sounding to alert us to an imminent climate disaster. We have one planet Earth, one common home. For the rich and the poor, we must act without delay. The philosophy of war and plundering and the unreasonable patterns of production and consumption spawned by capitalism, decried by President Fidel Castro, will lead us to the apocalypse. International relations are moving along a dangerous path. The US offensive, aimed at bending states to their will through threats and economic coercion, as well as military, political, and diplomatic coercion, efforts to subject them to an order based on their whimsical rules, together with the expansion of NATO and the development of a doctrine of aggression, hand in hand with the non-conventional war that's underway, will inevitably lead to a climate of tension and conflict whose consequences are unpredictable. Mr. President, Cuba, as a small island developing state, has paid a high price for defending its legitimate right to exist as a sovereign and independent nation. For more than 6 decades now, we have resisted a ruthless and unilateral economic, commercial, and financial blockade, which was ratcheted up to extreme, unprecedented levels from 2019, and this continued during the pandemic. 30 years have now elapsed since the first General Assembly resolution against this blockade, and at this time the US continues to ignore the almost unanimous demand from you to cease its illegal and brutal policy against Cuba. Endeavors are still waged on the part of the US to create material shortages, to sow despair, disenchantment, and to cause damage to the Cuban people. The government of the United States is strengthening pressure on banking institutions, companies, and governments throughout the world that are interested in establishing relations with Cuba, and the United States continues to obsessively pursue all sources of foreign exchange coming into the country to bring about the economic collapse of the nation. As a result, the Cuban economy has withstood extraordinary pressure that are having an impact on industry, service provision, are leading to a scarcity in food and medicines, and are leading to a decline in consumption and a decline in the general well-being of our people. The human damage caused by this policy and felt by all Cuban families is impossible to quantify, but is nevertheless vast, cruel, and immoral. The blockade is an act of economic war in times of peace. The current government of the United States keeps in force the most aggressive measures of pressure on our country. These were adopted by the government of Donald Trump and remain in force. This administration continues the unfair inclusion of Cuba on the arbitrary list produced by the State Department of countries that supposedly sponsor terrorism. This slanderous classification of our country as a sponsor of terrorism stigmatizes our financial bodies and institutions and makes it extremely difficult for us to conduct transactions or to pay payments or access credit. Cuba has been a victim of state terrorism and does not promote, nor will it ever promote, terrorism. On the contrary, we condemn terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. The government of the United States manipulates opportunistically highly delicate issues such as terrorism, religion, democracy, justice, corruption, and human rights. The double standards, the inconsistency, the selectivity, the manipulation, the political manipulation indeed, of which the United States are guilty, damage the cause of human rights. Some delegates have not dared to mention the sad blockade visited upon Cuba, and that is sad. I urge the government of the United States to solve the issues which fuel irregular migration and which promote the loss of life. These factors include their failure since 2017 to uphold their obligation, according to bilateral agreements in force, to earmark no less than some 20,000 annual visas to migrants. There is the Cuban Adjustment Law. There is the treaties that are politically motivated. There are restrictions placed on regular transit countries and the ratcheted up economic blockade. These cause migration and must be ceased. We've heard today that the processing of migrant visas will return to the Embassy of the United States in Havana, and that is a positive step. Cuba reiterates its readiness to move towards a better understanding and better relations with the government of the United States and to develop civilized relations, and including relationships of cooperation between both countries, and this on the basis of mutual respect, sovereign equality, and on the understanding that no attempts will be made to undermine our sovereignty and independence in spite of our major differences. We underscore the valuable commitment and the shown by Cubans and their descendants in protests that have occurred in that country and across the world to ensure that Cuba's sovereign rights are respected and to reject the merciless actions of the United States, in particular the policy of the economic blockade. I also wish to deeply thank heads of state and government for their statements in this general debate, and I thank them for their historic support as well as that of the General Assembly. And I'm also thankful for the demonstrations of solidarity towards Cuba by governments, key figures, political organizations, solidarity movements, social and people's movements from across the world. Today, this solidarity and support remains absolutely vital. Mr. President, despite the colossal challenges faced, the Cuban people and government have not let up in their attempts to forge ahead with the construction of a socialist society which is fairer, democratic, prosperous, and sustainable. We conquered COVID-19 with resources, our own vaccines, and the solidity of our public health system and our system of science. We were able to humbly contribute by sending 58 medical brigades around the world. At the worst moments of the pandemic, we sent those to some 48 countries. We work to recover the economic and social life of our country. We work to support the transformation of our communities and to sustain and extend social programs in the country. We continue to hone our legal order, our state and the legal order that is of our socialist state of social justice to guarantee the full and proper enjoyment of all human rights by all Cuban people. And we do this to ultimately enrich the system of social justice, which several generations have enjoyed. On the 25th of September, after a broad participatory process of popular consultation, we will hold the legislative referendum on an innovative family code. This vote will be a genuine exercise of direct democracy and of the effective power of the Cuban people. Mr. President, unity in diversity, as proposed by then President Raul Castro, is possible in countries of the South, and the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, which is growing increasingly stronger and is creating conditions so that our region can develop higher, better forms of cooperation on the basis of the very precepts of the Declaration of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace. We are grateful for the dignified stance adopted by several countries in the region on the fact that we've been arbitrarily excluded from various diplomatic fora in our hemisphere. We express our solidarity with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and with its constitutional president, Nicolas Maduro Moros, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with the civic military union of its people as it attempts to withstand attempts made to subvert and destabilize the internal order of that brotherly country. We reject the implementation of unilateral coercive measures in and against Venezuela. We denounce the imperialist attempts made to destabilize the government of reconciliation and national unity of Nicaragua. We reiterate our staunch support for the brotherly Nicaraguan people and for their president, Daniel Ortega. We stand in full solidarity with the sisterly nations of the Caribbean, and we support their legitimate claims for reparations for the damaging effects of colonialism and slavery. These peoples need and deserve to receive just, special, and differentiated treatment. We once again reaffirm our historic commitment to the self-determination and independence of the people of Puerto Rico. Haiti needs a special contribution to be made by the international community to its reconstruction and development. Humankind has a debt to settle with that republic. We support the legitimate claim of President Alberto Fernandez and of the sovereign people of the Argentinian Republic over the Malvinas Islands, the South Sandwich Islands, and South Georgia Islands, and the surrounding maritime areas. We express our full solidarity with the Vice President of Argentina, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, who was the victim of an unjust and unfounded legal and media attack, and then recently suffered an attempt on her life. We reiterate our staunch commitment to peace in Colombia. the clear preparedness and readiness for peace of Colombia's current president and relevant stakeholders mean that the region and the international community must extend their support to the nation. The necessary resources must be provided to support the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. That agenda establishes the roadmap for the development of that brotherly continent. We are lobbying for the search for a peaceful and negotiated solution to the situation imposed upon Syria, and we call for a cessation in foreign interference and for the full respect of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We support a just, broad, and lasting solution to the conflict in the Middle East. This must be a solution which guarantees the genuine exercise of the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to build their own state within pre-1967 borders, with their capital in East Jerusalem. And we call for the end of the Israeli occupation of the occupied Palestinian and Arab territories. We reaffirm our unwavering solidarity with the Sahrawi people. We reject the unilateral coercive measures imposed on the Islamic Republic of Iran. We condemn the imposition of unjust unilateral economic measures on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and we condemn foreign interference in their domestic affairs. We oppose interference in the internal affairs of the Republic of Belarus. We reaffirm our repudiation of the imposition of unilateral sanctions against the Russian Federation. We condemn the unfounded smear campaigns waged against the People's Republic of China and attempts to undermine their territorial integrity and sovereignty. We reiterate the unwavering support for the One China policy. We champion a serious diplomatic and constructive and realistic solution to the current war in Ukraine. This solution must be found through peaceful means with full respect for international law. The solution must guarantee the security and sovereignty of all. Mr. President, Cuba will continue to speak out loud and clear to reject hegemonism and domination, unilateral coercive measures, genocidal blockades, and attempts to impose one culture and one model on the world. We will never let up in the defense of the independence, sovereignty, and self-determination of peoples without any interference or intervention from foreign powers. We have a glorious past, and we must protect present and future generations of Cubans with the leadership of President Miguel Díaz-Canel. We will creatively resist and we will tirelessly struggle until we achieve our dreams of peace and development with equity and social justice for Cuba and for the world. Many thanks indeed.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Cuba. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Naledi Pandor, Minister for International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Kudusi, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, allow me to join all speakers before me in congratulating you on your election as President of the General Assembly and to wish you well in your role. I also thank the previous President of the General Assembly for his excellent leadership, and of course thank Secretary General Guterres, as well as the Deputy Secretary General for their ongoing leadership of our multilateral organization. Mr. President, we meet at a time when the UN family is facing its greatest tests. Member states have to work with the United Nations to develop effective responses to the current challenges. As the theme of the General Assembly indicates, these challenges are diverse, immense, yet interconnected, and no country can respond alone. Some have referred to this moment as a key turning point in history. The COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war strongly influence these attitudes today. However, for South Africa, the real inflection point will be a world attending fully to the needs of the marginalized and the forgotten. Our greatest global challenges are poverty, inequality, joblessness, and a feeling of being entirely ignored and excluded. Acting on the Common Agenda Vision 2021 of the UN Secretary General should become the major objective of this time, because addressing poverty and underdevelopment will, in our view, be the beginnings of the real inflection point in human history. The Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, and its human rights protocols all commit us to protecting all people without distinction of any kind. We must acknowledge that we face these crises today because we have not always upheld these foundational principles consistently and fairly. We believe international law matters when this one is affected, but doesn't matter when this other one is affected. That does not help to uphold international law. We have learned a great deal from the COVID-19 pandemic. It has provided us with a roadmap on what we should do as the global community and what we should not do to address global challenges. We need to use the lessons from the pandemic effectively. There were some noble initiatives, such as the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, which was co-chaired by President Ramaphosa of South Africa, the African Union champion for COVID-19 response, as well as the Prime Minister of Norway. This ACT-A initiative laid the basis for a fairer distribution of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. We would like today to thank all the countries that have acted on their financial commitments to the COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. Mr. President, global solidarity is also required to meet other pressing challenges such as energy and food insecurity, climate change, and the devastation caused by conflicts, including the existential threat of nuclear weapons. Up to now, instead of working collectively to address these challenges, we have grown further apart as geopolitical tensions and mistrust permeate our relations. We should, however, move forward in solidarity, united in efforts to address our common global challenges to ensure sustainable peace and development. One of the tasks, Mr. President, that we must successfully implement is to ensure that developing countries are not left behind when treatments are available. We must do this by creating and supporting research and innovation capacity in Africa and other parts of the world for vaccine production. by investing in strengthened public health systems and by ensuring that we produce thousands more qualified professional health workers. All this requires sustainable investment in higher education research institutions and in global research cooperation. The mobilization of resources and capabilities to strengthen the pandemic response and the preparedness of all nations must be substantially increased. It will be a tragic indictment on all of us as leaders if future pandemics find the poorest countries as unprepared as many were for COVID-19. We need to strengthen global health architecture to ensure that we are better able to meet the challenges of new pandemics and other infectious diseases of concern. We are proud as South Africa to be part of the solutions to these problems through the recent establishment of the first mRNA global technology transfer hubs that will contribute to the security of supply of life-saving medication for African countries and other developing countries. Mr. President, my country, South Africa, like many other developing countries, faces huge development challenges, including in our energy sector. We need to together collectively address global energy shortages, including by deploying innovative solutions that are cheaper, cleaner, and more accessible. Working with international partners, South Africa is developing its Just Energy Transition Plan to significantly reduce harmful emissions in our country. We are working on an expanded green economy intervention that is gaining significant momentum in our country. I would like, Mr. President, to commend the Secretary General for focusing attention during this General Assembly on transforming education. Education remains one of the most important drivers to end poverty and inequality, and we will work toward increasing access to education that is affordable as a country and a continent. South Africa has no-fee schools at primary and secondary level to allow the most vulnerable learners to access compulsory education. We also have a state bursary scheme for poor students who qualify for tertiary education. These measures have over the years served to increase the enrollment of learners who were previously unable to access education. In the field of research and innovation, we believe we need more partnerships such as the Square Kilometre Array Science Infrastructure Project hosted in South Africa and Australia. This is an international partnership that is one of the largest joint scientific endeavors in history. Partnerships of this nature must be encouraged to leverage scientific breakthroughs for development purposes. We also believe the multilateral trading system must be strengthened so that we genuinely create a conducive environment for fair trade and one that also provides opportunities for developing economies. If actionable steps such as these are not taken, developing countries will remain subject to an imbalanced global financial and trading system. Let us, Mr. President, use this moment of renewal to reiterate our commitment to multilateralism as the only means of building a better world. The United Nations must, of course, itself be transformed so that it serves its role cognizant of current global dynamics. It is unacceptable that 77 years after its establishment, 5 nations wield disproportionate decision-making power in the United Nations system as a whole. Transformation of the UN must include more representative, transparent, and accountable organs of global governance. For this body to be effective, the General Assembly must be revitalized, the Security Council must be reformed. We also cannot have a credible organization if it cannot hold persistent transgressors of the Charter to account. Mr. President, we believe we must act immediately to protect the environment and the world we live in for ourselves and for future generations. While Africa is the least responsible for the climate crisis, it does find itself at the epicenter of its worst impacts. We should therefore emerge from COP27 in Egypt with an agreement that contains enhanced and balanced actions on adaptation, mitigation, and financing. This, of course, must take into account our common but differentiated responsibilities and our respective capabilities. In addition, we must agree at COP27 on a mechanism for loss and change. In South Africa, our cabinet has approved wide-ranging policies to ensure that we can meet our newly determined climate change targets. We have established a climate finance task team to lead and coordinate negotiations with international partner groups to give effect to the Just Energy Transition Partnership. The partnership seeks to address South Africa's investment needs in infrastructure to facilitate our coal phase down in a manner that ensures that no one is left behind. Mr. President, I don't need to reiterate that building a better world requires peace and stability. South Africa continues to believe that conflict resolution must not come through fueling conflicts, but through investing in efforts aimed at political dialogue. We should aspire to peace as a global public good. There have been no winners of the wars of the past 7 decades. Instead, they engendered strife, distrust among nations, divisions, as we see this week, a perpetual misallocation of resources to weapons, increased poverty, and underdevelopment. All these are features and effects of war. While we work to address contemporary conflicts, we should not ignore long-standing conflicts, such as that of the people of Palestine, which has been on the United Nations agenda throughout the 7 decades of existence of this organization. We cannot ignore the words of the former Israeli negotiator at the Oslo talks, Daniel Levy, who addressed the UN Security Council recently and referred to the increasingly weighty body of scholarly, legal, and public opinion that has designated Israel to be perpetrating apartheid in the territories under its control. Israel must be held accountable for its destructive actions that have significantly impaired the possibility of a two-state solution. Similarly, we cannot ignore the decades-long struggle for self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. We must, Mr. President, treat all conflicts across the globe with equal indignation, no matter what the color or creed of the people affected is. South Africa calls for an end to the embargo against Cuba, which continues to impede the right to development of her people. In the same vein, we call for an end to unilateral coercive measures against Zimbabwe, which have compounded the problems experienced by the people of Zimbabwe and have a detrimental effect on the broader Southern African region. Mr. President, our quest to build a better world will remain unfulfilled as long as people are still discriminated against on the basis of race, gender, sex, ethnic, social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, or language. We have a responsibility to make sure that every girl child receives an education and that every woman has an opportunity to work, to study, to begin a business, and to have choice and control over her life and body. We must also ensure that more women speak at the United Nations General Assembly. We need to end the violence perpetrated against the most vulnerable, most often women and children. We have witnessed that women in conflict situations are particularly vulnerable, including women journalists. The murder of Shireen Abu Akleh and other journalists is a stark reminder of the danger that women in conflict situations face. We must do all we can to protect them and exert all effort to hold those accountable for harming them. We must also strengthen the capacity and draw on the voices of the youth on the African continent. In this regard, we need to harness the demographic dividend by maximizing our investment in quality education as a means to address intergenerational poverty, together with inclusive economies. Mr. President, Africa is home to more than 1.3 billion people. It is fast emerging from centuries of colonialism, occupation, and exploitation, from willful neglect and underdevelopment. We now have an African Continental Free Trade Area agreement, and the countries of Africa are laying a firm foundation for a new era of trade, commerce, and productivity. Our countries are establishing the conditions for the seamless flow of goods and services between African markets, for the growth of industry, and for the construction of roads, bridges, railway lines, ports, and power stations that will support growth. As we continue our efforts to end war, conflict, and insurgency in several parts of our continent and to prevent the unconstitutional seizure of power, we will continue to see greater alignment between our agenda and that of the United Nations and our body, the African Union. To overcome all these acutely global challenges, we must agree to a common path out of an increasingly polarized world, a rules-based international system predicated on international law and strict adherence to the provisions of the UN Charter is essential. Such a system should safeguard the interests of all and not only the powerful countries. We acknowledge the efforts of Secretary General Guterres in his vision, our common agenda, which we support very, very strongly. We believe he has provided us with options to put aside our differences, to build trust, and to forge a world where future generations will prosper and thrive. That should be the mandate we adopt and not the mandate of division and conflict. I wish you well, Mr. President, and I thank you for this opportunity.